And thank you to those online. Just want to give a heads up to everybody that we are recording the audio from the room and the screens on the Google Meet. As far as normal meeting type etiquette adheres here as well. If you are on your laptop in person, can you please mute your speakers and microphones so we don't get the feedback? And those of you online, could you please leave your mics muted as well until we get to the Q&A sessions and you are called on for questions. And if you have any other questions, problems that come up, please feel free to reach out to myself and Will Kamami. Will, raise your hand up. Jason Anderson, Liz Hoswell, or Shira Francis. I'm not sure where Shira is, if she's in the room or not, and we will do what we can to take care of problems. Yeah, we do not have a camera on the podium. We are trying to get that for tomorrow. The AV guy only had one that had a speaker and a microphone in it, and it was going to cause issues if we connected it. So unfortunately today, there's no video in the room. So apologies for that. And Hendrik, I know you like to wander and walk around, so feel free to use the wireless mic. So our first speaker is Dr. Hendrik Tillman. Take it away. You get 30 minutes, not an hour and a half.
Good luck. So it's a pleasure to be here today. I'm not your typical hurricane modeler, but I grew up in a country where on a good winter, we would have at least one hurricane force wind event. And 1992, 1993, my dad was very happy that with the 7th hurricane force wind event that winter, he only had damage to his roof a little bit for 3, so he won 50%, more than 50% of the time. He had no problems. And so Aaron asked me to talk for about an hour and a half. And he asked me to do it a little bit different, since I did it a little bit different too on the storm surge, the EDSERT model of user meeting. So I want to talk a little bit about other things then, where our next speakers are all going to talk about programs and about science and all that kind of stuff. You hear that all the time. I want to take us a little bit back about why are we here? Think about that. Why are you here? And I don't mean you get a paycheck. A lot of us are here probably because we thought it was an interesting thing to work on, with meteorology, or in my case, civil engineer. Sure, I became a civil engineer because I didn't want to be an architect anymore. I wanted to build buildings. And then I figured out that living on the beach every summer and on the lakes, that I actually could be a coastal engineer and do something with that for a job. That was kind of fun. And so I know a lot of us are getting into this kind of job for that reason. But why are we staying? I heard from my boss that he didn't want to hire me when they interviewed me. That was interesting. He didn't want to hire me. That was D.B. Rao, for those of you who may have known and remember him still. He said to Yehania Kelnay, I don't want to hire that guy because he's not going to stay here. Well, that was 30 years ago. So I'm still in that. But why did I stay? If you look in general at the federal employee viewpoints, interviews that or things that we're doing every year, NOAA and Weather Service are incredibly unique everywhere in the government, in the sense that most people working there are there for the mission, for the impact that you have with the work you're doing. For me personal, starting as a wave modeler, that's definitely the case. In 1999, I had worked for 6 or 7 years with the Weather Service. We implemented for the Gulf of Alaska a new wave model, a visibility model, an ice concentration model, and a vessel icing model. That year, before we implemented anything, the king crab fishery, or the Deadliest Catch, the movies, the television stuff, there were approximately 20 deaths a year in the industry. If you try and look that up on the internet, the data is not there anymore. Because after that, it has been 10, year after year after year after year. So me personally, why didn't I go into the industry to make more money? I know that I will never know who the people are, but I know that one implementation of one operational set of things that we did has saved about 250 lives. I might never know these people, but that is one of the reasons why a lot of us are working here. I do have some notes, although I don't have slides. And so, bringing that to hurricanes. Anybody old enough to realize in 1993 how long the forecast horizon of our hurricane models was? Oh yeah, Frank is old enough. If I remember correctly, it was something like 18 hours. Think of that. In Frank's career, we've gone from an 18-hour forecast to playing with doing 5 for sure, thinking about 7. And our 5-day forecast today is as accurate as the 18-hour forecast was when we started. How many lives did we save with that? I don't know. Because it's kind of hard to count these things. But think of it this way. I was talking to Vijay a little while ago, talking about the first time Vijay did with his team, a forecast for the Bay of Bengal operation with HWARF. Baleen, was it, right? Cat 5, tropical cyclone. The 2 Cat 5s before that, a few years before that, in 1999, had of the order of 10,000 or more fatalities. Baleen had 44 fatalities on the coast, 300 plus in total. There were more fatalities for Baleen due to excessive snowfall in the Himalayas than there were due to the traditional massive fatalities on the coast. So it's kind of hard to say how good or how bad are we, but the fact is that the amount of lives that we are saving is unbelievable. And so even if you just like to do the science and stuff like that, you're making an impact with the work you're doing for real. So is it just life saving? No, there's more than that. I remember from very early on in my career at EMC as a physics scientist, I would go to the Ocean Prediction Center doing their forecasts, and then we would have every now and then at the 4th floor in the World Weather Building, which fortunately doesn't exist anymore, we would have these calls about hurricane forecasting. The thing that blew me away, and that I was very careful not to talk about too much earlier on too, that some of these early discussions in the early 1990s, having FEMA talk to us on the tracks of the hurricanes that we predicted, we were not knowing where these things were going, and one of the inputs we were taking was where FEMA needed the forecast to be in order to be able to evacuate people. That is far, far in the past. There's nowhere near that we're doing that anymore. But I remember a case where, I don't remember the hurricane, but where a hurricane came up the coast, and we were asked by FEMA to make sure that the forecast allowed us to basically evacuate the entire East Coast. So I live on the Chesapeake Bay. The ones I remember are Floyd, Fran, and Isabel, the ones that really came right over top of me. I don't remember if it was Floyd or Fran, but that was one of the first cases ever where we told the Navy, evacuate Norfolk, leave your ships in Jackson. So it's not just saving lives. It is saving a heck of a lot of money too, because you're talking about millions of dollars that are spent on us having to evacuate people from the coast And so, what is our target? Are we good enough now today? Can we stop our work? No. Why are we doing a 5-day forecast? Why are we doing a 7-day forecast? Why were we talking about that 20 years ago? We're almost there, but why were we talking 5 or 7-day forecast as being important? FEMA starts to spend its first money, depending on the size of the area, between 5 and 7 days ahead. So we need a 5 to 7 day forecast in order to be efficient with how we use our money and how we support people and particularly how we pre-position all our resources to help people after the event. Why are we doing 4 cycles a day? Well, I'm actually not sure why we're doing that for hurricanes, probably because we're doing that also for the global models. No, anybody knows why we're doing the global models 4 times a day? Hint. The argument for doing that makes absolutely no sense anymore today. We started doing 6-hour cycles so that the television stations on the East Coast would have the best and updated forecast on their rush hour at 7 p.m., 8 p.m. Do we still get our forecast from the television stations? No, we don't. So this is one of the reasons why we kind of have to rethink about what we're doing with that. The other part, let me see if I'm still with my notes today. The other part with this is that when I started working at EMC, it was all about getting the best forecast. The forecast weren't that good. The 18-hour forecast at that time, I did not believe in climate change. I've changed my mind completely on that. And it was kind of funny because we were having these discussions at EMC about ensemble forecasting. My first reaction was, do you know this book? You have lies, them lies, and statistics. My first reaction to ensemble forecasting was you have lies, you have them lies, you have statistics, and you have ensembles. Oh, I have had to change my view on that one significantly too. And nowadays, if you're looking at forecasting in general, there is so much more value. There's actually more value in the certainty of the forecast than in the forecast, because the forecast itself is already good. So that's kind of a in-between thing. But look at the history, my personal history. Isabel, 2003. What made Isabel unique? First time we did a 5-day forecast. Although we didn't do it officially, we were running, was it HFIP or was it HFIP already? No. That were the older models we were running. Isabel was so predictable that the Hurricane Center was willing to do a 5-day forecast based on an experimental model run. How did it work for me personally? Well, I looked at the 5-day forecast. Living in Annapolis on the Chesapeake Bay, the 5-day forecast was right straight on top of my house. You know what my first reaction was? I'm safe. Yeah. There is no way a 5-day forecast is going to be verifying. Okay, 5 days later, it was off by 4 hours and by 20 miles. That came right over my home. 2 years later, Katrina. I remember talking to Max Mayfield, how 72 hours before landfall, he was trying to get Ray Nagin to start evacuating New Orleans. It took him another 36 hours to get that going. If we would have been able to better message how certain we were of that, that could have been a different story. 8 years further forward, Superstorm Sandy. What was making Superstorm Sandy unique and Hurricane Sandy? The fact that we know that there were two possible solutions, not one. It goes left or it goes right. That was the first time that I know we were trying to message that by having early morning leadership meetings with all of Weather Service and all of the forecast folks to have a single set of talking points that we all would use the same talking points. Did we do it well? We got there. 2 years later, Joaquin, sitting right smack on top of the Bahamas, drowning the Bahamas with fresh water. We did not know at that point if Joaquin would be going to the Carolinas or to France in the next 12 to 24 hours. We had no clue where that storm was going to go. We spent even more time on the messaging. We ended up with a tropical cyclone that we couldn't predict, yet there was no problem with the public, because they understood what we were saying. We told them, we don't know where this thing is going, but if you're living in the Carolinas, you're going to drowning anyhow, because there's going to be so much rain independent of what the track is. That was a success story. So we get better every time, right? Well, if we ignore things like Ian, with Ian, we had a problem that there was one county here where we had a breakdown in messaging, which you can argue was one of the reasons that became one of the most deadly hurricanes that we've had in a long time. So we do need to make sure that it's good to be having the physical science geeks here, but that where 20 years ago, 30 years ago, a few individuals like Vijay and Gopal and me could do something modeling-wise as individuals with small groups of people. Nowadays, we really need much bigger teams. The models are much more complex, but we need to make sure that we bring these social scientists in with us too. That we also bring in the economists and all these kind of folks to do that. How much more time do I have? 1 hour, right?
15 minutes.
Okay. Well, I might actually be
about to give you the 15-minute warning to the customer.
That sounds good. Then, completely different reason why I really like being able to stand up here and do this talk a little bit differently. And I won't do the same thing I did with the storm surge modeling when I asked Aaron, do you remember the storm of 84? I mean 1284, because I don't think we have that much of the hurricane data back here. But if you look at it, this community has a few more things that this community can be proud of. In the sense that this is actually really a community. And as such, between the HFIP and now the HAFS model and HFIP, we've actually been doing something with bringing a broader community in to work on our operational models for quite some time. And so between some of the work I've been doing with the wave model and some of the work that PJ and others have been doing on the HWRF and on the HAFS system, those were actually sales points. These two models were sales points together with the CRTM and data simulation to say we really should do this unified forecast system approach for all our modeling. A business model for modeling is not a four-letter word. The idea that we work together on a small set of solutions so that we have critical mass to work on these solutions. It is not a single model necessarily, because we need to make sure that we do unified modeling as a business model, not as a goal, because we want to make sure that the tools that we have cover all our requirements and all our needs. But with HFIP and with the HFIP, we've been able to show that you can do that. The fact that the first year that we had HFIP funding, almost all the proposals were done with other models than with what we done in operations. 2 years later, every single proposal for HFIP that came in was doing work with HWORF. And so that is a fantastic way of something that this community should take credit for having been able to push us in the direction of doing this with everything else and going down the road of this unified forecast system. So I know this is a little bit of a different talk than you normally get here, but I wanted to sort of bring you back to how important this work is for the impact on people, but also for helping us figure out a way of more efficiently do modeling in all kinds of other places and things. And think about for yourself why you want to do this kind of work. And I know that me personally, working for the Weather Service, even though I don't necessarily work all the time with hurricanes, the idea that I know that the work that I'm doing actually has a positive impact on people around me and saves lives and saves money is something that I personally really like. And so I'm going to do something that I'm really not good at and finish some time. Thank you.
You're actually 12 minutes early. You got
Yeah. No, I'll take questions. And so, yeah, the storm of 1284 was a hurricane force wind storm that created the barrier islands in the north of the Netherlands. So one single storm, actually, if you look at it, there were 3 storms over 4 years that all contributed to that. One single storm, just think of it this way, North Carolina, you go into one storm from having a completely closed coast to having suddenly having barrier islands. That happened in one single storm. And thinking about global sea level rise, I'm an ethnic Frisian from the north of the Netherlands, so I'm sort of closest you can get to being an indigenous Northern European. My tribes almost were wiped out by sea level rise 1,400 years ago. We survived. A lot of work, but we survived. And so that's kind of a fun thing to think about too. Anyhow, if there's no questions, I yield my time to Kevin, who has only 15 minutes, right?
Tracy has a question for you. Tracy, hold on.
When you say that your tribe survived, and what did they do in order to adapt to the new environment?
Oh, in the northern Europe, they started building what they call in Germany the Hallingen, which we call Terpen in Dutch and Frisian. So we built flat hills. So we started raising our villages first. That started already 1,300 years ago. And then about 1,000 years ago, we started building levees. And about 600 years ago, these levees were such that the seawater was always kept out. So the original levees were keeping the land workable, but in the winter let it flood. And so the interesting side effect of that is that the area that covers is the most fertile clay area in the world. If clay is in salt water, it's a bentonite clay. It's little plates like this. In salt water, due to the charging of the salt, the plates go like this. When the salt gets washed out of the water, the plates go like that. And so nowadays, I grew up 4 foot below sea level because we built levees. I went to school 8 foot below sea level because we built levees. And you get some really funny little side effects of that in the landscape. Because what used to be the tidal flats have sunk down like crazy. What used to be the waterways, the gullies, had sandy bottoms. They did not go down. So what used to be the places where the water ran out and are now the higher places in the landscape and are now the roads. So kind of weird. Anyhow, everything you didn't want to know about civil engineering.
We do have a question online as well.
Go for it.
Dave, go ahead.
Hi, Hendrik. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can hear you now.
Hi. Yeah, thanks. I was just wondering with your comment that you made about rethinking running 4 models a day. Can you pull that thread a little bit more and let me know what you're thinking about frequency of model runs and why you think it might not be 4 times a day needed? Thanks.
So I'm going to be very careful with that, and I'm going to put a little bit of background behind that. So in the year 2000, we had the famous National Academy of Science paper about the Valley of Death, about how hard it was to get new stuff into operations. They had 20 recommendations. We implemented every one of them, and the Valley of Death was just as wide as it was before, so that didn't work. And so we are looking at trying to get stuff into operations more quickly. And we're doing that by doing the science of it, by doing the engineering and the code management. That has taken about half of the time off of getting stuff into operations. And now the biggest problem that we have is the risk avoidance of our customers. And so the point that we need to do 3 years of hindcasts, of retrospectives and all that kind of good stuff, enormous amount of work that needs to be done before we are sure that when we put something in operations, it is not going to break anything. So why is this relevant for your answer, for your question, Dave? It means that we just need to rethink how we run operations in general. And one of the things that we are seeing is that we are running more cycles than other centers, particularly European centers. We also have a much earlier data cutoff. And so we need to discuss with our stakeholders, with the public, why we're running things and how we're running things. And one of the things that we need to discuss there is whether it still makes sense to run those cycles, or whether we could go to a global model that runs a cycling similar to what the European Center does. And right now, our 18C cycle is done before the 12C cycle of the Europeans is done. And so if you compare models, apples to apples, you should actually compare models that way. And one of the other reasons why we are no longer necessarily needing to do the cycling that we did is because we do have an hourly updating cycle for our over the US weather also. And so that also makes that original idea of doing this specifically for the media is really no longer there. And then I am not saying that we definitely should go back to 12-hour cycles. My argument is that we are doing things for reasons that are no longer valid. We are doing things partially because of the fact that our customers are very risk averse. All this stuff should be part of a discussion about where we want to go in the future. And this is where the fact that we are having a social science group now is also coming in handy. So we should be doing a better job in figuring out what we want to do. Because if you are going to ask the customers or the public in a traditional questionnaire way what you want, everybody wants more. And so the idea of working with social scientists that tell me like I shouldn't be doing that kind of questionnaires, I actually should interview my people and actually extract for them what they actually use and need. And I'm looking forward to getting that done. So I am not advocating for getting rid of the 6-hour cycle. I'm asking a question of the fact that we've done this for 25 years. Is this still the best way to do it? We need to ask the question. Does it help, Dave?
Yeah, thanks, Henrik. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes.
More of a comment than a question. I'm glad you brought up Joaquin. I mean, what an interesting storm. And, you know, you had a major hurricane that was moving westward, southwestward toward Florida, toward the US. And with that uncertainty of where we'll go northeast or northwest, there was very high confidence that it was going to stop and not continue on its westward track. And so very interesting case that I think covers a lot of our bases here in terms of messaging uncertainty while also showing how far the modeling has come and the predictions have come. That, I was willing to take a day trip down to the Keys with Joaquin spinning out there and, having high confidence that, okay, there's a lot of uncertainty here, but there's a lot of certainty in there too, right? So just a great example.
But it's one thing for you and I to know that. It's a completely different thing to message it right to the public. And we've gotten at a level of accuracy of our modeling that the additional value is, of course, in getting better forecasts still, but the real low-hanging fruit, if you can call it that way, is the messaging and making sure that people make the right decisions. And so the fact that we do need to really do end-to-end, that like 12 years ago when we did the last reorg of the Weather Service, when we made the decision no longer to stop at the best forecast, but go the last mile and do decision support, that is just as much true for hurricanes as anywhere else. Do you want me to go start singing now?
No, I did it in the wrong order. It's my fault. I'm sorry.
I was going to say that they told me they had problems with the hardware, then I had to start singing. The UFS, the UFS, the UFS, the UFS, the UFS. Because I would think that if I start singing, they want to fix it really quick.
This one here.
But anyhow, thank you for your attention, and I wish you a fantastic.
Thank you very much, Henrik. Our next presenter up is Dr. John Cortines, the OAR Deputy Assistant Administrator for Science. And again, I apologize that we do not have video today. Hopefully we'll have that remedied tomorrow.
That's okay. They don't need to see us. See the presentation. Again, thank you for the opportunity to say a few things, or at least 30 minutes of things. Welcome to Miami. Welcome to warm and humid Miami, for those of you who are visiting us from up north. It's great to have you here, and it's great to be part of this group. And like Hendrik said, it is a community. It's been a long time, and it's been consistently, I think, a very strong community. It's one of the earliest communities I think we've had, certainly within NOAA, that's centered around a particular area of interest, area of research, area of where we're focused on improving those forecasts. So I'm happy to see that. Am I going to have to do slides, or do I?
We're going to have to.
Okay, no problem. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Next slide. A lot of this I don't need to necessarily cover, but I do because I think it's important, just as Hendrik did, to remind us how important what we're doing is to not just our own individual science or our own individual interests in research or our own individual job within NOAA and elsewhere, but the importance of it is to the country. And this is the latest from our famous NOAA billion-dollar disasters, and we're up to 4 as it relates to hurricanes this year already. And we've got another storm, as you know, in the Caribbean, a disturbance in the Caribbean. So hurricanes are going to consistently be something that's important to deal with. And that's why it's important that NOAA continues to deal with them as a community. We can't do this alone. We definitely need a community to work on these aspects of it. So again, very important aspect of what we do and why it's important. Next slide. But not only in terms of what Hendrik had mentioned, certainly we know there's savings in lives and property, but the public realizes that. There's a study. There are a number of studies more recently looking at what's the value of the information that the public gets in terms of improvements to the accuracy. So how much more would they be willing to pay for these forecasts? And you can see from these results here that collectively the American public in this study, for more information on flooding and wind information, 500 million annually could go to NOAA to help work on these particular issues. So the public realizes the importance of supporting, continuing this research. Next slide. So let me talk just a little bit since I'm standing up here representing OAR today. Within OAR, we have a relatively new assistant administrator who came out almost 2 years ago now, I guess, not that new anymore. And one of the things that he wanted to do when he came in is to make sure that we understood as a line office, but this is applicable to others, not only about the things, what we do, but why we do them. And so we went through an exercise, and OAR came up with these 4 societal challenges. And so that's really what we've been, collectively working on as a line office. And what we're doing here at HFIP fits very nicely, squarely within protecting against extreme events and environmental hazards. So this fits nicely as we would expect, but also in the context of the other challenges, looking at confronting challenges of our changing climate, too much, too little water, and sustaining healthy environments and economies. So this is critically important to what we do in OAR, is my message. And our senior leadership recognizes that. And so we want to continue to play a part in the community for HFIP and support it. Next slide. So within the weather enterprise, we touched on this, and over the next 4 days, which is quite impressive, 4 full days for HFIP to focus on a number of topics, which again, I think impresses on the importance of the dimensionality, if you will, of what it takes to get, our ultimate outcome of better forecasts and improvements to those forecasts. But we look at all aspects. Hendrik mentioned the social science aspect of it, and HFIP, rightly so, had focused very early on, and still does today to a large extent, on the modeling part of it. And so we've included the social science, but that's not to neglect the other important aspects of it too, such as the observations, looking at, and then the DA that goes along with those important components, looking at the use of new technologies as it relates to those, both the observations and the communication of the information that we have to various stakeholders. And of course, recognizing that it takes people to do this work, people to do the research, people to collect the observations, people to issue the forecast. So we can't neglect the importance of cultivating a rich pool to which we can draw people like yourselves to continue in the future and make sure that we're still doing the best work for the public. Next slide. So over 2024, at least in particular, has really been engaged in a number of these aspects. And sometimes AOML gets the visibility, rightly so, with the investments that are engaged in the hurricane issue. But there are other parts of OAR as well that are looking at this. So it's collectively across OAR that we have a number of other laboratories that have been involved as well. So we, across several labs, but also programs, are heavily engaged and invested in HFIP and the hurricane problem. We're looking at, obviously, you understand the science of hurricanes, particularly at AOML, but improved observations and the total modeling aspect of this, and then the process understanding, of course. Driving efforts to create direct benefits to hurricane forecast and protect lives and property. Next slide. One other aspect that doesn't get the attention, at least in HFIP, is the longer term outlooks, the subseasonal to seasonal type of work. So we're still engaged in that at the OAR level, a number of programs and laboratories too, because we know that the public is asking for this, and not only pushing our weather scale forecast, but what are those subseasonal, what are the seasonal outlooks looking like? Government agencies have to position assets in place to be able to deal with these things. And so the more lead time that we can give these government agencies and others that are there to help in recovery, the better off it is. So we're going to still get that pressure to give longer term forecasts. And so we have to continue to make those investments as well. And so AOML as well with the Weather Service participate in the seasonal outlooks as well and make contributions to that. And we're looking at ways to help improve those outlooks as well. So we have a number of laboratories involved with that as well. Next slide. So certainly 2024 started off well and then had a bit of a lull and then spun back up again. So, you know, again, it continues to remind us the importance of investing in the research and the work that we're doing. I think with the early seasonal outlook that came out and then questions mid-season about whether that was going to pan out, and then the increase that we saw, I think really points to one, the need for continued research and our efforts to improve these outlooks, but also that things don't always work out as people may think they do sequentially in some way. And so it's important to maintain the efforts that we have run into our various efforts. Next slide. Again, as you all know, in terms of what the season has provided so far with April and June and July, and record early activity, as I mentioned, reduced activity in August for a number of reasons, and then this late season ramp up. Important aspects to consider for this season for sure. Next slide. So with HFIP, again, this was an effort that resulted from, Frank can speak to the history a lot better probably than anyone else in this room, but I think it showed that when a community or a group of individuals, and in our case it was with 2 line offices in which OAR and the Weather Service came together to work on this issue. That was, I think, an important driver, but also another reason why it was adopted within NOAA, because it wasn't just one line office or one laboratory pushing its efforts. It was really trying to work together between research and operations and how we can inform one another, how operations can inform research and research can inform operations. And so I think that's an important component that's HFIP has maintained throughout its lifetime, and is also one of the reasons why I think it's looked upon as a model effort in terms of developing a community as it moves forward. So the emphasis again on improvements in rapid intensification and track forecasts, improvements to our forecast and how we communicate these various storm hazards, and the incorporation of risk communication research is important for us to continue to create these more effective products as we move forward, and the product continues to demand that. Next slide. Next slide. So I already mentioned a number of the laboratories that were working in this effort between the Weather Service and OAR, which is critically important to maintain. But that's not to neglect the importance of including the private sector and academia. This is an important community, and I think we need to have all those components working together. And I think we've demonstrated success because we have all those components together. So it's something that I think we need to continue to strive and build on our strengths and work together. Next slide. This is just, again, kind of an improvement to the historical results because of investments in HFIP. HFIP has driven these improvements, and I think it's important to reflect on that going forward. Next slide. We looked at improving HAFS, as Hendrik said, or to 2.0, and have gotten that into operations, improving forecast intensities now at days 4 and 5, track forecasts at 1, 4, and 5, and improved the prediction of our storm structure and wind radii predictions at both short and in long lead times. And important to all of that has been the introduction of the moving nests, and that's been widely recognized as being important to improving those forecasts. Next slide. So HAFS, as everyone understands, with its initial implementation operations in 2023, certainly was an evolution in HWRF and that modeling system. But it's been through the persistence and additional ongoing research and interactions among this community that HAFS has evolved to where it is today, and that absolutely must continue. So as that's improved, recognizing the importance of including the whole system, it's not just an atmospheric, obviously, looking at how we incorporate the coupling both in atmosphere, ocean, and waves now. This continues to move us in the direction that we see continued improvements. And so we have to continue to expand and look beyond just these traditional spheres that we've relied on in terms of building our models, and looking to the future on how we incorporate even more of the Earth system into understanding the prediction of these storms. Next slide. Our research to operations has been really important aspect of what we do, recognizing that OML or GFDL or GSL can do all the great work research that we can, but if we don't get that into operations, if we don't consider how we get that into operations, if we don't think about how operations needs to implement that, we're not going to benefit from that research. And so there has been for a while now, even JTTI helped to spur that along as well too, is that emphasis on what does it take to move research into operations, and when do we start thinking about that process? I think early on when HFIP was conceived, there was that understanding that because we're talking about operations and research, we have to consider those processes. And so I think that's also been behind the success of HFIP, is not only conducting the research and making the improvements, but the speed by which we can move those improvements into operations. And so that's something that we need to critically continue to look at. Next slide. So I talked about certainly the modeling aspects of and talked about the needs of the Earth system. One of the other aspects that continues to show real promise is the inclusion of the ocean observations and the inclusion of the ocean processes in our predictions of the storms. And so over the last several years, we've continued to introduce new technologies, new observations focused in the ocean, not only at the surface, but subsurface. And through the studies, through various studies, have shown us that subsurface information that also is important in understanding the environment in which these storms can either increase or decrease. And so we continue to do that and continue to build out that ocean observing system. And we have incorporated into the broader observing system, the broader observing experiments that we conduct every year that's focused on the atmosphere, and have shown pretty good results. I mean, you all heard, and you'll hear for the next 4 days, even the work that we're doing on the drones that were released this year, both in the atmosphere, but also in the marine environment. So looking right at the ocean surface, looking below the surface, and then looking in those parts of the storm that we've never been able to get to before. So again, observations is going to continue to be an important component of what HFIP needs to consider if collectively we try to make those improvements to storms. Next slide. And again, so that's in addition to some of these more novel observing platforms that we continue to test and develop and work with the private sector. Again, an example of what the importance of working with the private sector and academia, working together, recognizing our expertise and how we address some of these problems that we've never been able to address before. So that's quite the challenge, and those will continue. So these are a number of the atmospheric drones that we've been testing most recently, familiar with. Next slide. Next slide. So we're looking on both sail drones and the autonomous gliders that we've deployed now for quite some time. That continue to build. We've got partnerships with academia. We've got partnerships with the Navy. We've got partnerships with the private sector. And it's precisely because of those partnerships that we're able to collect observations in areas we never have before. And so we're continuing to push the envelope on not only the creation of the platforms and the observations, but now also thinking about what would be the ConOps as we move forward for something like this, if we make these marine observations operational? What would that look like? And so those are some of the topics that we've been looking at most recently as we work with various partners and with OMAO as well, as they've stood up their access program as well. So those are things for us to be thinking about as we move forward, as we find that these observations are critical to the improvements that we're seeing in the forecast. How do we make this operational, and what would that take? Next slide. AI, can't talk too much about that because it's constantly changing. I mean, this is something that, while it's been around for a while, and NOAA has looked at AI for quite some time, certainly the public is and the private sector is keenly aware, and the technologies now are advancing very quickly. And so we've seen very early promise in what AI can bring us in terms of making increased improvements, better improvements, faster improvements in terms of our ability to provide produce information, but also in the accuracy of that information. And so we need to think about how we bring AI into all this as well. Next slide. And then also the societal impacts. We talked about the transition to operations, but the use of various test beds that have continued to be successful. Incorporation, bringing in more social scientists, and what we're doing from all aspects of it, from how the forecasters are using the information, how we're sharing that information maybe with the media, how we're communicating that to the public, and how we're getting more information then back from the public so that the information is flowing in two ways, so we understand how to improve what we're producing at the same time. So we've got to continue to include the social sciences in one way or another in what we're doing. And I think that's also been that's been something that HFIP from the very beginning has recognized, which has made it also unique a long time ago. We just didn't always have the resources to do that. But now there's certainly that recognition and the importance of doing that. Next slide. I guess a few of the social science efforts that OAR has been involved in a number of ways to provide the information to decision makers. And so going into the development of these various systems and funding programs with an emphasis on how do we get better information to decision makers. So we're going to continue to do that within OAR, looking at across a number of our laboratories in our programs. Next slide. So at the end here, I think pretty much we talked about the importance of involving the whole community. It's why you're all here, which is great to see. I know we have a number of people online as well too. And so our ability to continue to work together as a community, as a broad community, is going to be critically important in terms of our advancements. And so with that, the only thing I could say is let's keep moving forward and working together so we can continue to make these great strides. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. We have a few minutes for questions if there's any in the room. Or online. Stan, go ahead.
Yeah, normally we don't talk about this during HFIP, but since John brought up this seasonal outlook, I'll just mention it's interesting to note that in spite of that unusual late August, early September dead spell, that all of the parameters from the NOAA seasonal outlook, all of the ranges have now been met, kind of to our amazement, and that still the vast majority of the activity happened during the peak months of the season. So the only unusual thing is that couple weeks off, but everything else was kind of in line with what would be an active season or a hyperactive season in this case. But thank you. I know that's not the main subject of the talk.
Thank you, Stan.
Yep. Thanks, Dan.
Are there any questions in the room for John?
Yeah, hey, John, thanks for the talk. You know, HFIP has been relying on supplemental program funding in its history. Do you have any suggestion on how we move forward? Is that going to be the way it continues to go? Do you see that changing? Can you comment about the future of that partnership or dependability?
Question. You're right. HFIP has benefited mostly from supplemental funding because we often, in the devastating hurricane situation we have, the Congress often will come up with supplemental funding. So we'll want to take advantage of those opportunities. We're attempting to take advantage of the latest round as well too. So because I think that's important, because there's a direct tie to what we're doing in HFIP to what's often provided in the supplemental. So I think that part will continue. Now, whether we'll be able to get it as a kind of a permanent increase to NOAA's budget will just depend on the administration and the Congress. There certainly is a recognition of the importance of hurricane forecasting and hurricane research and the things that we're doing. I mean, it's in the Weather Act. It's something we have to do by law. HFIP is supported by the Weather Act. So NOAA will always provide some resources for HFIP. We have to. And the Congress sees that, and where necessary, they may augment that as well. So I think it's important for us to continue to, advocate internally, because sometimes if we're not reporting our accomplishments, or along with reporting our accomplishments, we should always be reporting what we could do. Because that's also the other part of the message that our leaders need to hear, so that when they're advocating, when they're talking to our counterparts in other federal agencies, but also on the Hill and with OMB, that's an important message. So otherwise, it may sound like we got what we need. We're doing great. We're moving along. So I think as we message, as you all message, that's something to think about. Highlight what we're getting for the resources we're getting, but also highlight what we could do with additional resources, because that can make a difference too.
If you don't mind, I'd like to add something to that.
Of course.
With one of the things that we've been able to do with the UFS and with discussions between OAR, Weather Service, and National Science Foundation, when we had a roundtable discussion 2 years ago, something has happened that I didn't think I would ever see in my lifetime, in the sense that NSF has started to acknowledge that research and operations, thanks to HFIP and HFORF and HAFS, and thanks to the UFS, are no longer separable. We're doing research and operations with the same codes, and with that, for the first time ever, it's now almost 2 years ago, National Science Foundation put out a Dear Colleague letter asking for proposals for doing work. So in terms of longer term funding, not being dependent on what the next disaster is, I think as a NOAA and broader community as a whole, we need to explore that with NSF and see if we can start some programs with them directly.
And we have worked with, Navy and others too, that recognize the benefit, so yeah.
Yeah, but the NSF is really new.
That's a big one. That's a big one.
Yeah, and that is, people may not recognize that, but operational was always a four-letter word for NSF, and they were not going to do anything ever that would smell of operations. And the fact that they changed their stance on that one means that we have a new place to look for collaboration and working together. And particularly, it makes it much easier for NOAA to work with UCAR and CAR.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the whole academic community.
Thank you, John.
Right, thank you.
Appreciate it. All right. Our next speaker is Kevin Garrett, the Director of OSTI Modeling Program Division. And always say nice things to Kevin about me if you have the chance to talk to him.
Thanks, Aaron. Great to see everybody. Happy to be here, talk a little bit about the OSTI Weather Service Modeling Program. Just want to say, I thought it was really good to have Hendricks talk first. I found it kind of sobering, actually, which maybe is a good way to set the mood for a workshop like this. It really helps us focus on why we're here. And then followed up by John, I thought was actually very, very motivating and encouraging in all the great research that's being done in OAR to support NOAA and Weather Service missions. So I will say that the schematic you showed with the observing system reminded me of my kid's bathtub with all the different toys floating in it. But I was disappointed to see only one satellite, given my Nestis heritage. So, because we've definitely got a lot of assets coming up that'll be in space and a lot of challenges with that that we'll have to deal with an HFIP. So, all right, with that, let's go to the next slide, please. So just a reminder or some new info on what the modeling program is within the Office of Science and Technology Integration. For those that are not aware of it, we are a portfolio within the National Weather Service, STI, with a 10-year vision to transform the Weather Service mission through innovative applications of science and technology. So we're really at the forefront of taking research and transitioning that research into operational systems, including various tools used by forecasters as well as our modeling systems. And the new pillar there incorporating the SB aspects as well. STI modeling program division, we have our new sort of mission statement that we've been looking at the last couple of months and really trying to refocus and redefine, why we're here and what our place is within NOAA. And so our new vision or mission is to advance the Weather Service integrated operational environmental modeling through open science to support accurate, reliable, equitable, and actionable analysis and forecast information. So again, we are a modeling program. We are focused on looking at emerging capabilities and opportunities to transition those capabilities into Weather Service operations for enhancements to our operational modeling production suite. We do this with 4 official programs within the modeling division: Air Quality Program, Weeks 3-4, the Next Generation Global Prediction System, and HFIP, again, that are all focused on developing new capabilities to the Unified Forecast System. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to highlight here, I know there's going to be a lot of talks throughout the week on these topics, but just really highlighting within the Weather Service a lot of the key accomplishments through the HFIP program and some of our partner programs that are focused on model development. So again, the operational implementation of HAFS version 2 back in July. Again, a lot of new capabilities with coupling with the ocean models and increasing the resolution, new DA, intercore, vortex initialization, those sorts of things. The HAFS real-time summer experiment, again, that was kicked off in August and is, I think, still going on until the hurricane season winds down fully, with, again, testing multiple variants of HAFS and looking for potential configurations for a next upgrade. Hopefully a version 2.x in 2025. So again, we're trying to still close some of those skill gaps with the HWRF HMON because we're really looking to retire those systems and free up those resources. So again, we still need to make some improvements with HAFS to perhaps reach that milestone. Hopefully, I think there'll be a lot of talks on the cloud-based HAFS ensemble system, which has also been running real time during the past hurricane season, the current hurricane season, funded out of the FY22 disaster supplemental. Our program did work with the supplemental team to develop a web story that's linked there for those that are interested to learn more about that. I assume most people in this room are very familiar with that capability that's being tested. I'll also note too, we did transition the HFIP community website to a NOAA.gov domain, and I think today or next week the redirect stopped. So I just wanted to put this in context that this isn't something that we.
Kevin, can I interject for 1 second? So coincidentally, the HREX ends on the 18th, which is next Monday. That also happens to be the day that hfip.org goes away as well. And it will be only hfip.noaa.gov.
Yeah, so this is not something we were planning to do. This is more of a government policy decision that sort of forced us, but we are obviously committed to supporting these administrative functions within HFIP and the broader community. And just a note there too as well, the UFS community website was transitioned to a .gov domain as well. So So we're working with the EPIC team to manage that. And then also the draft 2024 HFIP 5 to 10 year strategic plan. I think it's still in draft form, but I think it's getting close to have some higher level reviews, and hopefully that will get published in the next several weeks. Next slide. I just wanted to give a little bit of a overview of some of the things that we're focused on funding through STI, as well as through the supplementals that we're engaged with for planning and execution with Ben's team. And I'll start with the funding profile. Again, looking at the top curve is, STI funding for HFIP. And a lot of that is focused on, HAFS upgrades, the summer real-time experiments, testing and evaluation, T to O, working with our partners at AOML through the UFS R2O project. There's IRA funds for the next couple of years to continue initial development of the HAFS JEDI capability. And then again, with our partnership with OAR, looking at, and EMC, looking at advanced HAFS for the features you see there. We also support some of the development for agile testing frameworks at DTC, as well as for physics and verification improvements through CCPP and MET+, again, looking to advance these UFS components. And we also support product development, whether it's through the Hurricane Ocean Testbed or some of the tools that you see listed there, including the ATCF, which is developed and managed by NRL, who works closely with NHC to upgrade and support that system. But I did want to note on this slide, you see the red line, the supplementals, as we've been talking about, in the last half hour. Those are coming to a close this year. And so definitely that's going to extend some of the timelines for these things that we want to get done with version 3, whether it's data assimilation or the multiple moving nests and those sorts of things. There are going to be some challenges in having to prioritize what we focus our funding on in the coming years, unless we get another supplemental, which we're crossing our fingers will happen pretty soon. Next slide. So I wanted to change course a little bit and kind of look at, some of the HFIP programmatic strategy, and, understanding that, HFIP, as was mentioned in the Weather Act, is authorized, and, sort of the modeling program, brought HFIP in as a program to manage. And so people seem always confused when you're talking about HFIP. Is it the program or is it the project? I don't understand what the differences are. And so we had this sort of transition to a program within a modeling program. We're really focused on advancing HAFS and data assimilation, and perhaps losing sight of sort of that broader end-to-end capabilities that the project itself supported in the past. So, looking at observing system strategies, data assimilation, modeling, post-processing, all the way downstream to the products and services of the weather service issues, incorporating SBES. So I feel like, some of those components have been lost over the past few years. Again, I've only been here for 2 years, so you can tell me if I'm wrong in my perceptions. So again, we're trying to kind of revisit that, I think, from the program side, and make sure that, we maybe bring in a little bit more of this project-oriented. You might cringe when I say that, but just to make sure that holistically we're really addressing, what HFIP was, the project was put in place to begin with, to improve forecasting as a whole, and it has all these components, not just modeling and data assimilation. So we're looking at the executive oversight, so how we engage our senior leadership and communicate to them. It could just be like, hey, here's what we accomplished last year, here's what we're planning to do. And then next year, talk to them about challenges. But I think even John mentioned this, like, advocate for HFIP. We have challenges, we have resource issues, and advertising all of the great things that we're doing and can continue to do. And, if they want to accept extended timelines because we don't have enough funding, maybe that's not what we're looking for, but if they're willing to accept the risks that come along with that. But we just need to continue as a community to engage senior leadership and advocate for the resources we need to continue developing these capabilities. Partnerships are important. I know, I would say almost more organically within this community, the partnerships are really strong, whether it's across the OAR and weather service programs between WPO and STI, or with the labs and EMC, as well as with our operational units within the weather service. Obviously, we have really strong partnerships that we need to continue to foster and grow, and from the program side, look for those opportunities to continue to bring those folks together to talk about what the priorities are, where the gaps are, what we need to get done, to continue to support our mission through hurricane forecast improvements. And I'll mention the other, the UFS community, obviously looking to engage more broadly, to harness all of the research with the UFS components that we can leverage for the HAFS application itself. And so again, I'll mention the project structure, and trying to put something in place that kind of bridges our strategic plan with the various implementation plans that are typically developed within the weather service about what our requirements are for this upgrade or that upgrade. But again, it's not just about modeling. There are a lot of other aspects beyond the scope of modeling that we need to have maybe more formal engagement on, and really to strengthen the partnerships that already exist. And then lastly, looking at innovation and transformation, weather service is transforming. We're focusing on sort of revisiting the way we do operations. Again, that last mile and working with decision makers and stakeholders, really being, Ken Graham likes to say, eye to eye with those folks to be able to communicate in near real time those evolving risks and the uncertainty of those risks, so that they can make the best informed decisions that they need to make. And so we need to rethink about, like Hendrik brought up, why are we running 6-hourly systems? How do we become more agile? How do we rethink how we run models operationally? How do we bring in new technologies like AI to look beyond sort of, the status quo of what we're doing right now? I think there's, we need to really start refocusing on those longer term. And I hope that this is in the strategy that hopefully I'll be able to read in a few weeks. So 5 minutes, thanks. Next slide. So just again, looking at the project, I think, the role of the programs, there is really to look upstream at what our strategy is, who are our key users and stakeholders, what are their needs, what are the gaps in the guidance or information that informs their products and services that we need to understand and prioritize and fund, and then more maybe tangible strategies that we continue with the UFS approach for modeling. We continue with JEDI for data assimilation. Where do we focus on observations? What are the most impactful for our mission, and prioritize those, and SBES as well, and incorporating that into our not just our products and services, but our modeling. Again, helping us understand how we can transform the way we're doing things, and then mapping that into project plans in terms of what we're doing for R&D, testing, transition to operations, what cadence, coding, all the those really low-level working details, but really bringing in some strong maybe cross line office project leadership. And I'll just note too, I think when I talked here 2 years ago, I talked about, oh yeah, we need to just like fold HFIP into UFS RO. And I remember there was a lot of pushback to that, and now I can see why, having been here for a couple of years, that we really, keeping HFIP as a separate project with really the focus that it was intended on. I think that there's a lot of strength in that, and to not be diluted with a lot of the other efforts and overhead and things like that are going on. So, but I think it's important that we revisit that and look at that structure and how we all work together. And bringing in, more folks to help lead that effort, I would say, if it's not just going to be about modeling and related things. But again, we're all focused on the outcomes. And so, we're doing a lot of work in STI to understand, desired outcomes and how that maps back into what our requirements are, and the work that gets done in between to meet those outcomes. So I guess we can go to the next slide. There's also, obviously with the HFIP community, we are working on holistically developing new capabilities for those end-to-end processes to improve products and services from the Weather Service. We have the HAFS model with, more or less coordinated effort within the HFIP community, within NOAA. We've also thought about a UFS Hurricane application, and there have been a lot of challenges getting resources to EPIC to support that. What's the value? I think, the past couple of years, their priorities have been really focused elsewhere, and it's been difficult to have this additional capability or hurricane application brought in. So, but again, I don't want to lose sight of it. We need to really have these strong partnerships with EPIC to get the research community more involved. Even if it's not through a hurricane application, it's UFS, it's shared components. What can we leverage that may be suited for the hurricane problem? So there's definitely an opportunity here for more shared experience, with hurricane modeling in that space. And then the last slide. So again, some of our priorities, this is really just like a high level snapshot. Maybe not too inspiring. I don't know. But again, I mentioned HAFS, the next upgrade with the limited resources, focusing on closing some of the skill gaps to retire legacy systems. The HAFS ensemble, again, within the Weather Service and looking at probabilistic IDSS, this is really an important capability to have that more dynamic uncertainty where the regional hurricane system. JEDI, of course, this is, looking at probably first getting JEDI into operation with the global system, but again, getting all of our applications to use JEDI and trying to accelerate that. And then I'll mention a couple of things on the bottom here that aren't necessarily development or capability supported by the HFIP program, but by STI modeling, but they have a lot of value for prediction of hazards that are a result of tropical cyclones, outside of just the wind, the tornadoes, the flooding, and those sorts of things, a surge. We're transitioning the Warn on Forecast system from NSSL, the demonstration capability of the Weather Service. So this should be ready by next year's hazardous weather test bed. But again, we're going to continue to run that system as needed in near real time, just as NSSL has been doing, and they did recently, as illustrated here for Hurricane Milton, to really give you that 0 to 6 hour forecast at high temporal resolution, running every 15 minutes or half an hour, to really give you an understanding of like within that watch to warning space, where hazards, may be impacting folks and getting the message out more quickly in advance. And also the regional wave prediction system, again, working towards a more consistent wave forecast across the ocean basins. So just to give an idea, and then I know S2S was mentioned as well in developing the seasonal forecast system for the long range. So I will stop there. No time for questions, I hope. Yeah, thanks.
Good job. You burned off your questions.
Yeah, feel free to find me somewhere in the breaks.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Okay, next up is Mike Brennan, NHC Director.
Want to walk? Okay, here you go. Thanks. Thanks, Aaron. There's been a lot of really good things said already, so I'm not going to retread what's been stated. I do want to build on a few little things, but I sort of want to talk about where we are and how far we've come, and a little bit of context about this season, which is not over yet. Actually, if you want to think about real-time HFIP applications, we're sitting here chatting about how we're going to try to strategically deploy aircraft reconnaissance into our Caribbean system, knowing that it's late in the season, there's resource limitations. How do we make the best use of the observations we have to get to outcomes? And that's where I want to sort of wrap up. But this season's been pretty interesting. We've had 5 U.S. hurricane landfalls so far, 2 major, all along the Gulf Coast, and some pretty impactful hurricanes. I think you can argue that Helene is the most impactful tropical cyclone to make landfall in the continental United States since Katrina. It has totally rewritten the risk profile associated with hurricanes in the interior southeastern United States, the way Katrina rewrote the risk profile for coastal Louisiana. Go to the next slide. We've had 5 international hurricane landfalls. We had Beryl, a catastrophic landfall in Grenada, another landfall in Mexico, multiple landfalls in Cuba, including last week with Rafael. That was just last week, I think. So a little context. You think about since 2017, and I'm old, so I don't remember numbers anymore, so I have a note in my iPhone to keep track of this. We've had 25 hurricane landfalls in the United States. 11 of those have been major hurricane landfalls, and 8 of those have been Cat 4 and 5 hurricane landfalls. So during that time period, anyone want to guess how many storm surge fatalities we've had in the United States from those hurricane landfalls? Huh, I wish it was 0. It's not 0. 59. We have absolutely moved the needle on storm surge risk communication, evacuation decision-making in the United States. 7 of those Cat 4 and Cat 5 hurricane landfalls happened along the Gulf Coast. The other was Maria in Puerto Rico. But how long did it take to get there for storm surge? It took a decades-long, 40 to 50-year effort. You could probably go back to Camille, probably as sort of maybe the start of that effort in the United States to formulate storm surge risk mapping. That leads to evacuation zones. It leads to hurricane evacuation studies. Now we have a storm surge watch and warning. We provide decision makers with a continual spectrum of probabilistic risk information for storm surge, including reasonable worst case scenarios that allow them to make decisions to move people. We've had 9 storm surge fatalities in the United States this year. They were all from Helene, and they were all in the Tampa Bay area, peripheral to the landfall location. None in Milton, none in Helene in the landfall location. So where are the gaps? We don't have that kind of information for wind. We certainly don't have that kind of information for freshwater flooding. So let's go to the next slide. There's our fatalities so far in the United States this year from hurricanes, tropical storms and hurricanes. Preliminary numbers are still moving around. There's still a lot to determine. About half freshwater flooding. We've had more wind fatalities in the United States just from Helene than we've had almost in the last 11 years. And if you look at Helene, the number, it's the deadliest storm from wind in the United States. It goes back to at least 1963. And it's not close. Not close at all. It's also the deadliest storm from freshwater flooding in the United States going back to 1963. That's a little closer. Harvey had about 67 fatalities. I think we're up to 80 in Helene. So how do we get to those outcomes? That we've all talked about outcomes. Everybody's touched on it. So if you go to the next slide. So there's Helene. John Cangelosi did this map for me last week, and it doesn't have all the numbers. And again, the numbers are still changing. We've had about 225 fatalities from Helene. It's a staggering death toll for a hurricane in this country. And look at where they all are. They're all in North and South Carolina. Almost all the ones in South Carolina are from wind and Georgia. Almost all of them in North Carolina are for freshwater flooding. Look at how many fatalities there were in Florida. You had the surge fatalities. I think they were almost all in Hillsborough County. One up near the, I don't know if that was wind or freshwater flooding or indirect death near the landfall location, but hundreds of miles inland. So how do we get to change those outcomes? We lack calibrated guidance on wind inland, especially wind gusts. Almost every single one of those wind fatalities was due to trees falling on people, either in their homes, cars, outside, and it's almost all gusts. The gust factors in Helene were incredible, 2 to 3 times the sustained wind once you got into interior locations in Georgia and South Carolina. In fact, when we were in South Carolina a couple weeks ago, was interesting how many times John Q, who's the morning coordination meteorologist in Columbia, said, South Carolina has been planning a long time for another Hugo, but nobody thought it would make landfall on the Gulf Coast of Florida. So again, it's totally rewritten the risk profile for a Gulf Coast hurricane landfall. And we've seen, you go back to 2004, multiple Gulf Coast landfalls, significant flooding in Western North Carolina, but nothing on the scale that we saw here. Again, the rainfall rates are higher. It's nearly impossible for us in our current state to describe the impacts of that kind of rainfall occurring on that scale. It was off the charts. If you look at it was greater than 1,000-year return period over much of Western North Carolina. Some of the river forecasts were off the rating curve, so they can't even tell you how high the water is going to get. Now, that's not to say that there weren't lives saved. There were absolutely lives saved in Western North Carolina. There were emergency managers and counties, and they went and knocked on doors in the most vulnerable communities. And a lot of this hasn't really made it into the media. Things get overtaken. But 40 or 50 homes in multiple counties in the most vulnerable areas, campgrounds, right along riverbeds. There were hundreds and hundreds of lives saved because we knew it was going to be bad, but we couldn't visualize and tell people what it was going to look like. Landslides. There were almost 2,000 landslides in Western North Carolina during Helene. One that killed about 15 people. So again, how do we get into that space and get to that level of investment that we've made as an enterprise into storm surge and reducing storm surge mortality to get into that space in wind and freshwater flooding? And we're getting there. We're getting there with flood inundation mapping. There are limitations. It's still deterministic, but it's rolling out. It's going to at least tell people, hey, these are areas that are going to get wet. And they were able to do some of that. In Eastern Tennessee, we had operational FIM that helped people evacuate a hospital. So it's absolutely happening, but it's just got to grow out in scope. And we're working on wind speed probability 2.0, that's already been talked about, to get into better inland wind prediction, better gust factors. But again, how do you translate that? We're not an agency of arborists, but I'm serious. It is all trees and tree outcomes. And how do you tell people what kind of trees they should have around their home, or whether they should leave their home, a frame-built home, whether you need to leave your home because of the wind and the tree impacts you're going to see. So that gets into some really hard space that we as a community have to think about. So going forward, how do we move the needle on this? So there's a couple ways. We can get better observations, better modeling, better tools that directly affect the forecast that comes from the Hurricane Center. You can make our forecast better. Or you can work on downstream products that get into hazard space that are then directly used by decision makers or to communicate that risk, that play into things like watches and warnings, play into, again, probabilistic hazard information. So that's how we have to think about this as a group. And in a resource constrained environment, we have to be able to tie everything to that and the economic impact that's been touched on too. But absolutely, that's how we have to use that as our sort of North Star going forward. So I know I have some time left. If there's any questions, glad to chat. I know NHC's got a lot of presentations later today that will focus on some of the challenges we face this year and some of the successes too. I will wrap up with saying, you'll see the forecast statistics from the Hurricane Center this year. I'm going to steal John's thunder, so I'm sorry, or Philippe, but record low track forecast errors at every forecast lead time. And more aggressive forecasts in terms of rapid intensification than I've ever seen. I joked with Dan that when we go big, we need to go bigger. Because when we forecast RI and we get really aggressive, we're still undershooting in the big events. So we're getting there. We are making forecasts that we absolutely would never have had the confidence to make 5 or 10 years ago. And can you imagine the storm surge risk communication for Helene or Milton if the first forecast had been 60 knots instead of 100 knots? You're setting expectations at an entirely different level, and you're talking about moving things and getting decisions made. So we're absolutely making a difference, but there's still a long way to go. And Helene and other storms like that are just an example. So thanks.
But we have a question that came in on the chat from someone you guys may actually know and remember. Pete Black asks, Mike, what do you think led to the large inland gust factors in Helene?
It's a great question. I don't know if we entirely understand. They seem to happen in the remnant eye wall. So just very turbulent environment, very fast forward speed. We forecast, but the thing with the wind risk with Helene is it kept getting worse every cycle because we were forecasting Helene to be stronger. We were forecasting it to move faster. And what's going on in the dynamics of a collapsing eye wall over land? We don't have a great observational database to know. We probably know less about a hurricane when it's over land than we do at any other time in terms of its structure and dynamics. So it's a great question. Probably some stability considerations. There's a little bit of topography playing a role. Certainly as you got into the higher terrain of Western North Carolina, that's absolutely topographically driven. But I'm talking about places like Augusta, Georgia, where you had sustained winds of 30 or 40 knots and gusts of 100 or 90 over very, very large areas. So it's a great question.
And we have one. I'm sorry. We have one more question that came in from Dave. Dave, go ahead and ask your question.
Well, great. Thanks. Hi, Mike. I just want to say first, congratulations to NHC for your track forecasts this season. They were just incredible. My question for you is, do you in the Hurricane Center look at things like the FIM model, inundation, possibilities, and does the model forecast for rainfall play into that from the National Water Center? Is that helpful yet, or is that still a vision?
Yeah, the FIM and the flood messaging really comes from the Water Center and the weather forecast offices. It's not something we're directly involved in. I know the FIM is driven it can be driven by the National Water Model or by the RFC river forecast inputs. So there's a couple different flavors of that. But the purview for the flood messaging piece is really at the local weather forecast offices and expanding outward from the Water Center.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yep.
And as I'm supposed to be one of the session co-chairs with Aaron, I don't want to be responsible for us falling behind on time. But there are some interesting questions that come about with a storm like Helene, just because historically HFIP and NHC have focused so much on track and intensity. At what point does HFIP's role continue into those impacts of, inland freshwater flooding, especially in a storm like Helene, which was starting to undergo extratropical transition once it was over North Carolina, and also, with the tornadoes over Florida, that's traditionally been an SPC issue, the freshwater flooding, a WPC, and then also the WFOs to communicate that risk inland. So, it brings up some interesting questions. What's NHC's role once a storm moves in that regions? What role should HFIP be playing to help improve those forecasts?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, Kevin talked a little bit about the Weather Service Ops model and how that's changing. And I think the role of NHC and the INCEP centers in general is probably only going to grow in that space. We serve as a collection point for all the hazard information. It all flows through us, even when it's coming from other places. But I think HFIP has to move into all that hazard space because that's where things are happening. And so it's absolutely a direction we have to go. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, man. All right, our next presenter is Vijay Talapragada from EMC.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be here in this HFIP annual meeting. One reason potentially is because I started my career almost at the same time when HFIP has started, a little before HFIP has started. And except for last year, I attended almost every annual meeting in person, other than those years where we had virtual meetings. So I think many of you in the room also have similar association with HFIP. And I can see a lot of familiar faces that go back to 2007, 2009. 2009 was the first HFIP annual meeting. And this floor has given opportunities for many people to contribute to to challenge, to accomplish, and and also worry about what next. All these things were happening in this room, in this very august association of community that we have put together very proudly, which is called the HFIP. If you go to the next slide. What I would like to, I don't want to repeat what already has been said by people who all talked about the HFIP, but certainly I wanted to reiterate a success story for building and sustaining a strong community of modelers, researchers, observationalists, social scientists, operational forecasters, and stakeholders, not just within US, but across the world. And EMC has been all in supporting the HFIP through advancing operational models, not just the HFOF, the HAFS, but also GFS, the GEFs, and the data assimilation systems that go with them. So although the primary focus is on the hurricane models through HFIP, we should not ignore the mighty contributions from the global models, the ocean models, the data assimilation systems, all supporting advancing our hurricane science and forecasting. Next slide. You already saw this from John. We made huge progress from GFDL hurricane models to, well, I think before that, it's a quasi-Lagrangian model that was used for hurricane prediction prior to GFDL, and then GFDL hurricane model led to the start of the modern era high-resolution numerical models. Tim Marchuk is here, who probably has the largest experience in hurricane modeling in this room. So we started with the HFOF. Transitioning GFDL to HFOF was a great journey and a huge success, I would say. It didn't come easily. And then from HFOF to HMON. The HMON is the other one that little known, but still very useful for NHC forecasters, and actually is doing a little bit better than some of the well-known models for track and intensity, surprisingly. But that tells us how much effort has gone into each of these models to make them better and better and better. And HMON replaced officially the GFDL model, but the next era is the UFS era, using the Unified Forecast System framework, developing the next generation hurricane models that are known as HAFS A and HAFS B now. This is already second version implemented. And if you count all the implementations that have happened since 2007, when the HFOF was implemented and supported by HFIP, we have made almost every year a major upgrade, except for 1 year that I remember when we could not put science upgrades, but still made technical upgrades for that year. So annual upgrade. Why it is important is because the technology and the research that's advancing in the science, in the community, cannot wait. We should provide a pathway for transitioning that research into operations. And that's the motivation the hurricane teams, both at HRD, OML, and EMC, have taken to make sure there are enough things that are lined up for testing and evaluation that they can make an impact and can be transitioned to operations at the same time. So it's a huge enterprise. That the amount of testing and evaluation gone through each of these upgrades is, if you just convert them into millions of hours, each year we spend about 100 million hours just doing testing and evaluation in 3 months' time. Other than the real-time experiments that we do during the hurricane HFIP real-time experiments. So all these innovations have a path to operations, giving credit to the developers, the forecasters who are evaluating them, and the implementers, particularly at EMC. Each innovation has its own advantage in terms of how it is being selected, how it is being confirmed and vetted and tested and evaluated, all with outcomes resulting in operational implementations. Next slide. So I wanted to share that the HAFS is not just limited to the Atlantic and the Eastern Pacific. We are global. And that's important because another hallmark for HFIP is to support these technologies tested in all global basins. We have tropical cyclones that are in the weather service area of responsibilities, but also other areas where people can take advantage of these technologies. And also they provide us the proving ground how the developments that we are testing in the NHC areas of interest are reflected in other areas of interest outside of the service domain. And you can see a few typhoons here, like Gami and Kongray this year. Almost all storms that we have at least one or two forecasts that have perfect match. Not necessarily every cycle. These are cherry-picked, as you can see, but certainly this was not possible in a few years ago. If you ask whether we have similar success story for every storm, probably not. But we have reached a stage where I can pick up at least one cycle for each storm that has similar performance, where the observations and the forecasts match pretty closely. And Fenric already mentioned we are providing the same technology to India for Bay of Bengal and North Indian Ocean. Actually, today there are 5 storms, 4 in the Western Pacific, 1 in the Southern Hemisphere. We have not started the new invest yet for the Caribbean storm, but so that's how it shows how these models are being used routinely for all tropical ocean basins. Next slide. This was also mentioned by Kevin. The HERC is another adventure that we are using the cloud to test hurricane ensembles in real time. A huge effort, huge undertaking, and very costly affair. So we have to be prioritizing these storms selectively. And there are a couple of people who are putting day and night of their time into making these products happen. And thanks to NHC, the HOT, who was able to take advantage of some of these products into their test beds. So this is probably the future in terms of how we advance the probabilistic IDSS and take these technologies to the next level. And also coupled to other downstream models like the storm surge and inundation and so on and so forth. You will hear a lot more on the model advancements, but I wanted to give you some highlights. We are moving into a full Earth system model concept for all our global applications like the GFS and the GEFS. They will be fully coupled: atmosphere, land, ocean, ice, and waves. And we are targeting GFS version 17 with 9-kilometer resolution, improved data simulation, and for the first time, JEDI for marine components, a lot of physics improvements. And likewise, the GEFS V13 will have fully coupled forecast system, same physics as GFS, quarter-degree waves and ocean, 31 members, and for the first time, we will be advancing the forecast range to 48 days from the current 35 days. We just started the 30-year reforecasts that will give us means to calibrate all these forecasts. And needless to say, the evaluation metrics for GFS and GEFS have a strong bearing on how they perform for tropical cyclones. So NHC has a huge stake in approving these models for implementation. So, and the downstream, how these influence the HAFS and other models. So the testing and evaluation includes a multi-season evaluation for tropical cyclone forecasts. Next slide. Well, AI, ML, I don't think we can live a day without talking about it, particularly in this field. As John mentioned, these are rapidly evolving and probably changing on a daily basis or a weekly basis. We are not far behind, although we probably are not at the forefront, but EMC has also taken this as a serious effort in terms of advancing these AI-based data-driven models for global applications. A few team members were put together to use the GraphCast as the basis for forecasting using the data-driven models. The next slide. Yep. So we have implemented experimental real-time GraphCast using our own GDAS as initial conditions. And there are a few variables and few vertical levels that are being trained and forecasted on an experimental basis, and have some results for the tropical cyclones in the next slide. These are the track forecasts for 2021 to 2024, almost 3 years worth of, about 340 cases here verified. And you can see in general, just like any other international centers are demonstrating, the track forecasts, particularly in the Atlantic Basin, the TGFS is the GraphCast based test, has shown rather significant improvement out to at least day 5, and showing some additional promise in terms of further improving our track forecast. Not so much for intensity and not so much in other basins, but certainly in the Atlantic, we have shown that particularly a few cases like Beryl at a longer lead time have shown huge improvements relative to our dynamical models. So there is some future in this that we cannot ignore, and we cannot underestimate the power of these data-driven models and how to improve our confidence in these models and how to produce these products in a more timely manner that we can use in the forecast process is something that we need to also discuss. And the last slide, I believe, is the future outlook. We will continuously make advancements for operational models, the physical models that we use for forecasting, and the data assimilation systems, the HAFS, GFS, GEFS, RTOPS, etc. Improve use of existing and new observations in our data assimilation, both aircraft, satellite, uncrewed systems like what John mentioned, including the novel observations from the aircraft for the boundary layer, as well as the sail drones and the gliders, the new ocean observations, the commercial data. So many new data sets that are coming in. We will be focusing, and it's probably also not relatively easy, but the appeal of new observations tested on hurricane models is still there because we can see the impact more clearly. The signal is coming out more strongly in hurricane models than, say, a precipitation forecast or something else. Stronger collaborations with community, including international partners. This is continuously going to be our mantra here. Next week, actually, we are going to do a HAFS tutorial in India, the first overseas tutorial. We had one in Howard University in May. The collaboration with community partners can only grow through that kind of community colloquiums and workshops and training. That HFIP has actually led the path in providing H4 tutorials. More than 20 tutorials were conducted for H4, both inside and outside of US. And we are continuing with the same path with the HAFS. The same source code that we use in operations is available for everybody, open source, using the same UFS framework. And the community has access to even more advanced features than what we have in operations. Adapting emerging technologies for including AI/ML, and stay engaged with the stakeholders across the value chain, not just the forecasters, but also the social scientists and the researchers in various multiple disciplines that support the hurricane modeling and research. So looking forward to working with you all again into the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vijay. Unfortunately, we are out of time for that slot. We have to move on. Our next speaker is Dr. Gus Alaka, the Director of Hurricane Research Division of AOML. Bear with us for a second while we switch slides.
No problem. Gopal will also be joining me for the second half of the presentation today. Is that a little bit better? I also just talk very loud in general, so I don't want to.
Hold on, we're not shared yet.
Okay. I was just going to make the joke that I don't even need this, but I will, and I'll try not to blow out your eardrums. So.
Yeah, but the people online.
I know.
And we've got 90 plus people online.
That's excellent.
We are good.
All right, thank you. So yeah, I thought I would talk today about, a vision for HAFS research and research to operations at AOML HRD. And as I mentioned, Gopal will help me and talk in the second half here. I wanted to say as well, it's a very humbling experience to be here and now be the director of HRD and working more closely with HFIP than I was before. and some big shoes to fill with Frank and Shirley doing a fantastic job in this position. So I'm learning, about 2 months on the job now, and really excited to take this forward. Next slide. So I wanted to start out sort of what is HRD's mission and where are we going? And so this isn't, I would say, rocket science or provocative, but HRD is going to lead the way into the next generation of tropical cyclone research by studying and advancing observations, observing systems, data assimilation, and numerical modeling, and the interactions between these 4 areas in a way that no other group in the world is really equipped to do. And, you know, you can have a stool, you can have a wheel, something that's round in some way, but I chose a wheel here to sort of show how the different components of HRD, you know, work together, where, you know, modeling and OBS emerging tech and DA observing systems who sort of sit at these spokes along the rim of the wheel, and they're connected to one another, and they're all connected in the middle via those spokes to the core vision and plan. And, you know, I think this, again, is not rocket science, but one of the things that we've really been trying to, I would say, build at HRD is a better integration and a better sense of cooperation as we go forward to make sure we're leveraging really what makes, I think, the Hurricane Research Division very, very unique. Next slide, please. And so here, I'll start on the right side of this slide, actually. So here's sort of a schematic looking at the structure of the Hurricane Research Division. And there are those sort of 3 areas that I described earlier. And I had a version of this slide that I decided not to share today because I think that's looking in the past. Where we want to go as we go forward is find a way that, like, where's the overlap between these areas? And so I bolded HFIP here, although the other areas, including AFEX, which is our field program experiment, all these are really important things that really need to sit in the middle of these areas. And HFIP is really a very important vehicle for that. And I will say, you know, HFIP has definitely been modeling centric over the last several years. And I think one of the reasons for that is just, you know, facing the harsh reality of the funding landscape and making hard choices. And I think through those hard choices, I'll say, you know, a lot of supplemental funding obviously went into this. HAFS was able to come online in record time as an operational model. And really, I mean, that's just not the work being done at HRD, obviously. That's all across the community being facilitated by HFIP. And so I think that really lends a great blueprint as to where we can go as we go forward into the future to say, hey, if we really want to have a vehicle, something that can really bring different groups from all across the world together to really accomplish our goals, I don't think you have to look that much further than the developmental process that got HAFS into operations. And I think that, as I said, is a great blueprint that can be extended to other areas, thinking about how we can better interact and phase with observations collected in the field and through other observing systems, including satellites, and also thinking about how we can make the most bang for our buck, right? How do we use those observations most effectively through advancing our data assimilation systems and really understanding observing systems in a way, identifying where we can collect those observations in the field most effectively and make sure they have the biggest impact on the forecast. And so on the left side of the screen, I sort of connected with an arrow to the modeling and prediction there. Obviously, we have HAFS, and this looks a lot like the operational HWRF did in terms of its overall structure in that it's storm-centric. And so here, you know, there's a moving nest that's following one storm of interest that's sort of in the middle of this domain. And it's a really fantastic model that still has room to grow, but it's done some amazing, made some amazing predictions so far. So if you can go to the next slide here, this may be a little bit hard to see, but this is a simulated reflectivity graphic or animation from HAFS B version 2.0, so the operational version for Hurricane Milton. And, you know, Vijay made the comment in his presentation about, you know, you get some forecasts that are nearly perfect. And this was one of them, not only in terms of track and intensity, identifying the landfall location 5 days in advance, but also the structure, which is really, really important if we want to be able to take that next step to really, I think, you know, making leaps and bounds in terms of our hazard predictions. And I mean, again, getting the small inner core of Hurricane Milton, I'll be honest, when I first saw this forecast and saw 898 as the millibar, I said, uh-oh, what are we going to eat this one later? But it ended up being a fantastic forecast. And it goes to show, again, beyond just the track and intensity and even the minimum pressure, getting the structure is really, really important. And here toward the landfall of Milton here, getting that asymmetric structure, pretty darn accurate as it interacted with shear and other features. Next slide. So what are we doing now and where are we going? So we really want to unify our research and our 2.0 priorities. Obviously, we work so well with other parts of NOAA. We've been working great, I would say, especially with the Environmental Modeling Center and the National Hurricane Center for years in terms of identifying how we should move forward in improving hurricane modeling in general. But, Gopal and I talk all the time in terms of how we should really do this in a way that we're meeting HRD's needs while also meeting the community needs. And so the way I like to describe it is almost like having the parallel lanes, right? So we now are working in a community code base in GitHub that, we can transfer our research into operations, or at least make it available to operations in a way that really wasn't as easy in previous generations, even just HWRF, working in that system, it wasn't as easy. And now things are a lot more straightforward in terms of what are those bridges that we can build from the research side over to the operations. But at the same time, I really want the Hurricane Research Division and AOML to be mindful of what can we be doing to make sure that we're setting ourselves up to meet our own priorities in terms of getting research done and making sure we're paving the path toward innovations in the future. And so at the core of this, I would say is as we go forward, from the modeling perspective, is the basin scale HAFS, or we call it HAFS M for multi-storm. We love our alphabet soup here, but HAFS M for the sake of argument. And this is what, we're calling HRD's next generation modeling and data assimilation system. And I think we're making, some fantastic progress this year. I'm not going to steal some of Gopal's thunder. He's going to go through some of the details, and there's a lot of interesting presentations throughout the week that are going to touch on the benefit of moving to a multiple moving nest type of system. But really what this does is allows us to have a test bed for HAFS innovations. We can work on diversity, we can work on ensembles, we can work on our physics development, and we can really work on data assimilation and initialization improvements in a way that we just can't really do as effectively in the current operational storm-centric framework. And on the right side here is an animation of this HAFS M system tracking 3 storms at the same time, Milton in the west, Kirk in the northeast, and Leslie in the southeast of this domain. And really, the work that Gopal, myself, and Jujen and others have done over the years is looking at these interactions between the storms. Again, not rocket science, is really, really important to get an accurate forecast. And it's not just the track. That is a key part of it in terms of making sure the synoptic scale structure and the flow is reasonable. But the interaction between these storms, especially shear being imparted from the outflow of one storm to another, and what we call our maybe intermediate interactions. We're not just thinking of Fujiwara. We're thinking of these interactions occurring at all different scales. And what this paper and other work that's being done in HAFS now is showing is that simply by adding more nests and keeping everything else the same, you get this huge improvement. And so we're really, I would say, doubling down in that regard and happy to continue investing there. And so, JEDI as well is a high priority, and working on training the next generation as well. Vijay talked about some of the tutorials that are ongoing and workshops, some great work there as well. Next slide. So I think, we want to use the observations to improve the model, and we also want to use the model to optimize the collection of the observations. So I'm stealing some thunder from Jason Sipple and Jason Dunyan, looking at the 2024 Hurricane Field Program. This is as of October 31st, so it does not have Raphael in there or the soon-to-be Sarah. But, there's a lot of data that's collected, a lot of amazing data, that a lot of hard work goes into the collection of that data. And really, I think HRD sits in an optimal place to at least inform how we can be optimally collecting that and assimilating it into hurricane models like HAFS to improve the forecast, and really starts at improving the analysis. Next slide. And just to hit home here, Jason Sipple supplied this to me, but looking at HAFS B, intensity and track improvement, when we have recon data versus when we don't, the results pretty much speak for themselves. We're talking about 20% or more improvements for intensity and track when we have this recon data in weak storms. So it really makes a big difference, and it really lends to why we want to get out there earlier, if we can, to observe these systems. So now I'm going to turn it over to Gopal, who's going to talk about some more specifics of what we've been working on. 4 minutes, Gopal.
Thank you, Gus. I'm not going to take much of the time. Can you go to the next slide straight away? Okay. Yes. What I want to report here, what Gus said, is the success that we have had with the HFIP and from STI, what was funded, and I have to report those findings on where we go next. This year, we have been able to run in real time thanks to the HEREX, which started in 2012. I've been living with this HEREX experiments, and somebody asked me, how are we able to make such accelerated progress with HWARF now with HAFS? It's all thanks to HFIP. HFIP experiment, which we run every season. And here you go, the left-hand side shows the multiple moving nodes that Gus was pointing towards. This is running semi-real time, 4 times a day, basically, cycles. We ran it in Jet, the backup, we backed it up in Hera because of sometimes Jet failures. But overall, we have covered several storms here, and you can see the next column shows the products, basically the intensity that you can go to our website, see it in semi-real time, near real time. And you can see the first thing that I looked at is the structure, like what Gus was talking about. With this multi-storm, is it even reproducing, or are we getting really decent results in terms of structure? Yes, you see Milton, the same case was run, multiple storms, and we are able to reproduce. You can see the shear vortex interaction, which means we are able to make progress on what we have. The workflow is coming from HAFS system, and we are able to make progress beyond the HAFS system, which is in operations with a multiple moving nest. With B, it is able to produce the baseline results, and you can see for hazard predictions, so what we have put is the helicity for Milton, and all these products seamlessly. We have the same products for HAFS B as well, HAFS A in our website that Gus started developing. And you can go to the next. Which I was rubbing my eyes when we looked at the number of forecasts. You can look at the number of forecasts we did it over the season, the skills versus HAFS B. What we are starting to see is about 10% gains. And first time I started to think how we are going to get most of our talks. Bill and then Lou is going to present on why, and then there are going to be a couple of talks on why we are getting better skills here. In fact, it's all, you can see 10% improvement in skills with the basin scale or HAFS M, and then more the intensity skills over HAFS B. Basically, it's almost 20% gains that we are starting to get. And we looked into it, and most of the talks, the second half tomorrow, will be on how we are getting it for the right reasons. Can you go to the next slide, please? And then the second project that we have been doing is HAFS physics, and we have been, because both the versions of HAFS A and HAFS B have very less diversity in them, we started conducting experiments on trying out with convective schemes, which are known to show diversity in terms of convection. What we see on the left-hand side is the HAFS B, and then with TCs scheme, and this is a particular case on Hurricane Ian, where we started testing. Can you go? You can see the structure once again. We have all these things in our products website, basically, wherein we are able to reproduce good structures. And then can you go again? And the next, again, the skills. While the track forecast are almost next to it versus HAFS B, we are always comparing with the HAFS B because HAFS B and HAFS A are showing lesser diversity. So we want to increase the diversity. As far as the intensity forecast goes, the skills over HAFS B is definitely showing some improvements. And Hazelton will be talking about, thanks to Fanglin and Andy, both of them have been working together with me on these physics developments, which we'll be talking once again. This is second project. The third one, can we go to the next slide? Are the products, it was mentioned about ensembles. Kevin had mentioned about ensemble products, the HEREX project. One of the things that HRD or AOML is doing is conducting more advanced products from these ensembles. You can see an example of, again, once again, left-hand side shows with TCs scheme. The blue ones are with TCs schemes. The red ones are with the current SAS scheme. And you can see the diversity. This is some kind of product that we produce. These are simple, straightforward products. So there's no rocket science again there. But the right-hand side shows products much beyond what we have done. It's more researchy products wherein you can see the difference between the extreme member of the spectra, one showing the depth of the vertex itself, and down you see how that depth of the vertex really influences the storm track. These are the products that we are developing. It will be available next year. For the next season, we are starting to develop this based on the HEREX experiment. These will be available next season. Can you go? And the last one, which we tried for a recent case, Is the humidity different between these extreme members? How does the large scale, why is the tax difference between, or why is the intensity difference between, so much of intensity difference between two members? That's what we see here. And the last slide is, yes, as we progress, my job has been to push research to operation, envelope of research. HFIP has been helping that and AOML. At AOML, what we tried to push is that first we said about single nested domain, and then we had HAFS A. Then we went to HAFS basin, where you could see the reality coming up, wherein we have multiple storms. And eventually, this has been a vision from the beginning, and we are progressing towards this direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gopal. And Gus. All right, we'll be taking a 15-minute break. We will start back up again at 4:17 p.m. Eastern Time with a session chaired by our friends at NHC.